Carbon dioxide levels are higher today than they have been in 5 million years, and it's all because of us burning fossil fuels. It is truly unprecedented. I think it's a good thing, and in this video, I'm going to tell you why. My name is David Hilderman. I'm just some guy that's been trying to figure things out. This is what I think carbon dioxide is doing to our world. Before life on Earth, there was no oxygen in the atmosphere. Every oxygen molecule that we breathe was created by a plant through photosynthesis. Oxygen is too chemically reactive to remain a free element in air without being continuously replenished by the photosynthetic action of living organisms. When spacecraft are sent to other planets, the first thing done to check for life is the existence of oxygen in the atmosphere. Plants use three basic inputs: water, carbon dioxide, plus the energy of sunlight to create two outputs: plant biomass and oxygen. It is really quite incredible to think that the oxygen that keeps me alive with every breath was created by plant growth. To provide me with oxygen for one day, 3.75 kilograms of plant growth has to occur. When plants first evolved, there was at least 70% carbon dioxide and no oxygen. Right now, our atmosphere has 21% oxygen and 0.04% carbon dioxide. So where did all that carbon dioxide go? When plants first evolved, they grew really fast. They did this for hundreds of millions of years. They basically ate up all the carbon dioxide that was there from the beginning of the Earth and reduced it to a trace gas. After all the original carbon dioxide was used up, plants could only grow as fast as the carbon dioxide created by animals and bacteria. It got to an equilibrium. In this state, carbon dioxide stayed between 180 and 280 parts per million, or ppm. Plants evolved to accommodate this, and many died off. During cold periods like ice ages, the oceans would absorb more carbon dioxide and the levels would drop to the lower levels. During warm periods, the oceans would release carbon dioxide and the levels would go up to the higher levels. Most plants can't survive at less than 150 parts per million. At the periods of the lowest levels, our Earth was only 30 parts per million above the death of plants. When plant growth was faster, dead plant biomass accumulated faster and became what is now our fossil fuels: coal, oil, and natural gas. Before the Industrial Revolution, carbon dioxide was 280 parts per million, and now it is 410 parts per million, a 46% increase. It is still a trace gas in our atmosphere. When we first discovered fossil fuels and started burning them, we didn't realize that we would also be accelerating plant growth, but that is exactly what we did and are still doing. Here are some images to give an idea of the effect of increased carbon dioxide on plant growth. A study that looked at satellite data from 1982 through to 2015 found the world experienced increased plant leaf coverage, equivalent to adding 18 million square kilometers of forest to the Earth. This in spite of massive deforestation that we always hear about. This would be the same as adding to the Earth all the plants of the continental United States times 2. It is a massive increase. The study estimates that 70% of this greening is due to increased carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. When plants are in fertile soil with sufficient water, the limiting factor to their growth is carbon dioxide. Another effect of increased carbon dioxide is that plants are more drought resistant. Plants need to open pores called stomata on their leaves to absorb carbon dioxide. Water evaporation results with the opening of these pores. With increased carbon dioxide, these pores do not need to be opened as much, and less water evaporation occurs. There are two significant observations as a result of this. Increased carbon dioxide increases plant growth without any additional water, and plants can better survive in drought areas. The southern edge of the Sahara Desert is experiencing plant growth now that is allowing for agriculture. This has not happened in living memory. Increased carbon dioxide is accelerating plant growth in water as well. Doubling the ambient carbon dioxide to seawater causes phytoplankton to increase in growth rates by 40 to 50%. The increased phytoplankton provides more food for organisms, and the increased photosynthesis increases oxygen levels for fish, saturating the water beyond what exposure to the air provides. Putting carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere through the burning of fossil fuels is totally a man-made thing, and it is unique to the Earth over the last 2 centuries. It has increased carbon dioxide in the atmosphere to levels that the Earth has not seen in millions of years. It has also resulted in plants being able to grow at rates not seen in millions of years. This is changing ecosystems, but the change is more life and more plant growth, not devastation. So now compare this totally demonstrated and measured effect of carbon dioxide on our world to the theory, and it is still just a theory, that carbon dioxide is going to cause catastrophic climate change. The increase in carbon dioxide is an unprecedented occurrence. Is the current Earth's temperature? It is only unprecedented over the time that we have had thermometers, but that invention has only been around for 300 years. Let's have a look at what is known of past climates. An example of when it was as warm or warmer than it is now is when the Vikings settled in Greenland around 1000 AD. They settled there to farm and most likely had to clear forests to do so. They grew hay and raised cattle. This was during what was known as the medieval warm period. It got colder during the 1300s, and by the 1400s, the Little Ice Age hit. The colder weather made it much harder to grow hay and clogged the seas with ice between Greenland and Norway, making it difficult to get ships through. By the late 1400s, the Vikings were no longer on Greenland. No one really knows what happened to them. Similar agriculture could be done again now in Greenland, but it wasn't possible for 700 years. During the Little Ice Age, the Thames River froze in London. They had carnivals on the river every year during this time. Here's a painting of the event. What caused the warming that brought the world out of this Little Ice Age? Carbon dioxide levels remained the same throughout this time. During the Roman period, about 2,000 years ago, grapes were grown in northern England. They were also grown there during the medieval warm period and are grown there now as well, but haven't been grown there for hundreds of years. Historical temperatures are estimated by what is called temperature proxies. What this means is that rather than using a thermometer, things like growth rates in tree rings or isotopes from ice cores are used to estimate what the temperature was at a given time. Whenever you see a historical temperature graph, it has most likely been created using temperature proxies. Christian Ewing and Fritz Weinherholt looked at proxy studies from 1,230 sites on the medieval warm period. They plotted the results on a map of the world. Compared to today, red is warmer, blue is colder, green is wetter, and yellow is drier. 88% of the studies found that it was warmer during the medieval warm period than it is today. In 1990, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, used this graph based on numerous proxies to describe the climate over the past 1,000,000, 10,000, and 1,000 years. In this report, it says that there is growing evidence that worldwide temperatures were higher than present 5,000 to 6,000 years ago. At least in summer, though carbon dioxide levels appear to have been quite similar to those of the pre-industrial era at this time. The pre-industrial era is before we started using coal for energy. In 2017, Professor Guansheng Ji and his group from the Institute of Geographic Sciences and Natural Resources Research, Chinese Academy of Sciences, published a paper where they collected a large number of proxies and reconstructed a 2,000-year temperature series in China with a 10-year resolution, enabling them to quantitatively reveal the characteristics of temperature change in China over a common era. Professor Ji concluded that the general characteristics of the impacts of climate change historically were negative in cold periods and positive in warm periods. For example, 25 of the 31 most prosperous periods in imperial China during the past 2,000 years occurred during periods of warmth or warming, a cooling trend lasting near 100 years and social economic decline run hand in hand. A rapid development supported by better resources and a better environment in warm periods could lead to an increase in social vulnerability when the climate turns once more to being relatively colder. Professor G concluded that whenever it was warmer, it was better for us, and that we should be concerned if it gets colder. And yet we are continually told that we are facing catastrophe if things continue to warm. This graph is from the IPCC report in 2001 based solely on tree growth rings, except for the 20th century where they tacked on actual thermometer data. This is famously known as the hockey stick graph. The most commonly referenced graph now used by the IPCC is based on this graph by Michael Mann. Notice how, if you compare the temperatures where it highlights as the medieval warm period to the Little Ice Age, the difference in temperatures is only 1/4 degree Celsius. How could such a small change result in what the Vikings experienced in Greenland? The previous graph from the 1990 IPCC report showed a 2-degree difference. Also notice that if you check on Wikipedia for anything about climate that includes a period over the last 1,000 years, you will see this hockey stick graph referenced and not the one that was widely considered accurate for decades, even though this hockey stick has very little climate history, like agriculture records or artifacts like art to back it up. To tell what the Earth's average temperature now is very difficult. We have thermometers all over the world in places with radically different temperatures. Over the last century, scientists believe that the Earth has warmed 1 degree Celsius. So think about that. In Winnipeg, Manitoba, the temperature varies from -40 to +30 degrees Celsius. How can you determine what the average temperature actually is? I thought that I would do some of my own research into temperatures in Saskatchewan, where I am from, to see if there has been any trends in climate there. Indian Head, Saskatchewan has daily temperature records going back to the 1890s. On the Environment Canada website, you can download daily records for each year. So I downloaded 130 files of data, wrote a Python script to combine them, then started analyzing. If I wanted to, I could take this first graph and say, look, it's not warming, it's cooling. This graph plots the number of days over 30°C. As you can see, there were significantly more days over 30 in the 1930s. The 10-year trendline peak at 1940 would be the average of the years 1931 to 1940. On average, there were 3 times as many days over 30°C in the 30s than during the 2010 decade. The next graph shows the number of days under -35°C. There are less of these extreme cold days now than in the past. Here's a graph of the annual average of all daily high and low temperatures. The trend lines show increases. Daily high temperatures have increased about 0.7°C, and the daily lows have increased about 1.6°C per century. So the difference between night and day temperatures have decreased by 0.9 degrees over the last 100 years. In 1959, accurate measurements of atmospheric carbon dioxide was started on a remote mountain in Hawaii. They have continued ever since. In 1950, atmospheric carbon dioxide was about 300 parts per million. That is only 7% higher than before we started burning fossil fuels. Now, in 2020, carbon dioxide is 46% higher than pre-industrial levels. Here is the annual average temperature in Indian Head from 1890 to 1950, and then from 1950 to 2020. In Indian Head, it warmed 1 degree Celsius before carbon dioxide levels rose and has not risen since. I have earnestly looked for evidence that the Earth is warmer now than it has been in 2,000 years. This would have to be the case if we are to believe that we are, in fact, in a climate emergency. Based on historical evidence like agricultural records, it is not warmer now than it has been in 2,000 years. If you put your faith in things like tree rings, good luck, since when is temperature the only thing that makes trees grow faster? I put more trust in archaeological evidence. When I look at data regarding international temperature trends, I see evidence that there likely has been warming since the 1970s, but I also have seen evidence that more warming occurred before 1950. To see for myself, I picked one location in Canada that had 130 years of temperature records and analyzed the raw data. I found that it really hasn't changed much, and the little change that did occur happened before CO2 substantially increased. The average world temperature as published on NASA's site shows little temperature increase before 1980 and most after. I have seen similar analysis to what I have done with Indian Head, Saskatchewan data to many individual locations across the US. The results of those analyses showed most warming before 1950 as well. I do not know how NASA and the other agencies calculate their average temperatures, but however they do it, they seem to be able to ensure they keep getting a piece of the $13 billion in climate research funding dished out every year. The greenhouse effect is a natural process that keeps the Earth's surface temperatures possible for life. Without the greenhouse effect, the Earth's average temperature would be minus 18 C. The sun primarily radiates visible light. When this light hits the Earth's surface, it warms it. This creates infrared radiation. Without the greenhouse effect, all this infrared radiation would go out into space. When infrared radiation encounters greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, they absorb the energy and re-radiate the infrared in all directions. Some of this radiation goes back out into space, and some of it comes back down to Earth. It has an insulating effect. 95% of the greenhouse effect on the Earth is caused by water vapor, 3.7% is carbon dioxide, and other gases make up the rest. So water vapor produces the vast majority of the greenhouse effect. The greenhouse warming effect of carbon dioxide, when doubled, is 1 degree Celsius, which isn't enough to be worried about. So why do climate models tell us of impending doom? It is because they believe this 1 degree Celsius of warming will increase water vapor, which will cause more temperature increase, which will melt ice caps, so the ice-free land will absorb more of the sun's radiation, which will cause more temperature increase, which will also increase water vapor, which will also cause more temperature increase. Get the picture? It's called positive feedback. If all that would happen with doubling carbon dioxide was a 1 degree Celsius temperature increase, no one would worry. We wouldn't be trying to go carbon free. It's the positive feedback issue that creates the problem. I have a problem with the positive feedback idea. In general, if the Earth worked this way, instead of a stable climate, ours would be unstable. If they were correct in the positive feedback notion, then anytime temperatures were warmer than normal, more water vapor would occur and it would create runaway temperature increases. Every 2 to 7 years, we get El Nino events that result in the average ocean surface temperatures increasing as much as 2.5 degrees C, as they did in 2016. This results in significant warming all over the world and drastically increases water vapor in the atmosphere. It has not caused catastrophic warming in the past. Many scientists believe clouds are what keeps our climate regulated. Increased water vapor increases clouds. Everyone knows that a cloudy day is cooler than a sunny day. Clouds reflect sun's energy back into space. There are scientists at the highest levels that contend that human-caused increase in atmospheric carbon dioxide is a benefit to life on Earth and will not result in catastrophic climate change. They include Nobel Prize winners, professors from Princeton and MIT, a scientist that invented the models to predict hurricane paths, as well as scientists that have pioneered working with satellite records to determine the Earth's temperature. We have to ask ourselves, why is it that these scientists are never heard on the world stage? I have truly searched for convincing information that our Earth is experiencing unprecedented warming. I learned that there are wooden tools that were discovered on Baffin Island a few years ago that were exposed when an ice sheet melted. The tools are carbon dated to be 6,000 years old. The only way that a wooden tool could be intact for this period is if it was frozen in ice the whole time. If it wasn't frozen, the wood would have decomposed. Is this evidence that it has always been warmer before now? I thought maybe it was, and I was really excited. Perhaps I and the rest of the world hasn't been manipulated all these years. Maybe it was a good thing for the environment that I bought the most energy efficient vehicle available back in 1990, a plug-in hybrid in 2018, never bought a truck for our family, and resisted frivolous trips to Mexico. I learned that that wooden tool isn't evidence that it is warmer now than it has been in 6,000 years. The last significant ice age ended 10,000 years ago when Montreal was under 3 kilometers of ice. The ice caps have been melting ever since, and the oceans rising ever since. I would love evidence that we are in a climate crisis so that I could just go with the program. But what I've learned says that the Earth is doing great for having nearly 8 billion people. The more I learn about what we are doing to reduce carbon emissions, the more I am convinced that this is damaging the Earth and keeping people poor. I'm David Hilderman, and that's my CO2 rant.